Hello, and welcome to Basics for Gamers Presents Magic in Pathfinder Part 8. The last special type of spell that we want to discuss is rituals. Rituals are spells that may be cast by anyone regardless of character class, but have greater cost than usual. To cast a ritual, you must first learn it. Learning a ritual does not count against the number of spells you are able to know from your class or other sources, nor does casting a ritual consume a spell slot. But you must meet a level requirement for casting. And because spell levels are not equal to character levels, this may be more complicated than you might expect. For example, Commune with Nature is a 6th level ritual, but you must be at least 11th level in order to cast it. A ritual's level may be no higher than half your level rounded up in order for you to cast it. And again, any class can cast a ritual, but if you are a member of one of the main spellcasting classes, this is easy for you to remember because the highest level ritual you can cast will be the same level as your highest level spell slot. Then we see the ritual's cast and cost requirements. These function almost identically to the spells that we've already discussed, except casting time is always at least 1 hour and maybe several days. 1 day of ritual casting is 8 hours, so there will be time for rest and feeding during the casting, but not enough free time for someone to perform another downtime activity in addition to casting the ritual. When a ritual requires multiple days to cast and has multiple casters, it's assumed that they break in shifts so that there is always someone keeping the process going by chanting or meditating. Also, no rituals list required spell components in their cast entry, and that's because all rituals require material, somatic, and verbal components. A ritual's cost entry shows special resources that must be provided. In this case, casting Commune with Nature requires 60 gold worth of incense. These costs must be provided before the end of the ritual when a skill check is rolled. No resources are lost if the ritual is interrupted prior to completion. Next, let's talk about the line that says Secondary Casters 1. One key difference between rituals and normal spells is many rituals require more than one caster. They all require one primary caster who leads the ritual, and each stat block may also list a required number of secondary casters. In the case of Commune with Nature, it requires one primary caster and one secondary caster. Only the primary caster needs to meet the casting requirements, and the secondary casters are basically helpers. For example, Commune with Nature is a 6th level ritual. Again, this means the primary caster must be at least 11th level to lead the ritual, and they must have learned the ritual from someplace, but the secondary caster can be of any level and does not need to have learned the ritual. Another way that rituals differ from regular spells is that each have at least one skill requirement. Casting a ritual will require at least one skill check, which often has a minimum proficiency you must meet as well. For Commune with Nature, we see it has a primary check of Nature at Master Proficiency and a secondary check of Nature with no minimum proficiency listed at all. What this means is at the end of the casting time of 1 day, the primary caster, who must have at least Master Proficiency in Nature, must roll a Nature skill check to determine the success or failure of the ritual. And the secondary caster must also roll a Nature skill check, but there is no minimum proficiency for them. I don't see it spelled out in the rules, but I assume this means that they can attempt the check untrained. We'll talk more about this process in just a minute. This is fairly simple with a ritual like Commune with Nature that has one secondary caster and one secondary check, but let's look at something a little more complex like Primal Call. This ritual requires 4 secondary casters and crafting, diplomacy, and survival as listed as secondary checks. What this means is of those 4 secondary casters, one of them will need to roll a crafting skill check, one will roll a diplomacy check, and one will roll a survival skill check. Each secondary caster will only roll one check, not all of the checks, and the 4th caster will not need to roll any skill checks as part of this ritual. Those are all of the pieces of the ritual stat block. Now let's bring it all together and walk through the process. First, in step 1, the primary caster must learn the ritual. This cannot be selected as a learned spell freely when leveling up, and must be acquired in some fashion through gameplay. All rituals are at least uncommon rarity like this one, so it's unlikely to be available for purchase, but could be provided as an adventure reward or taught by an NPC. Then, confirm there are enough casters. This ritual requires one primary caster who must be at least master proficiency in nature, and it also requires one secondary caster. Once those requirements are met, the primary caster decides if they wish to heighten the ritual. Casters may heighten rituals as long as the final level is not greater than half their level rounded up. Heightening rituals can have several benefits, but be aware that doing so will also increase the DC of the skill check that's required to cast it successfully. And then the casting begins. This ritual will require 1 day of downtime to cast. Assuming the casting time completes without interruption, after 1 day of downtime, which is typically 8 hours, not 24 hours, it is time to roll the skill checks and learn if the ritual is a success or not. This process follows the order of all secondary checks are rolled, and then the cost is consumed, and last the primary check is rolled. So first, the secondary caster must roll a nature skill check. The DC for secondary checks is the standard DC for a level that is equal to twice the ritual's level. Commune with Nature is a 6th level ritual, so you double that to 12th level, and then compare that to the table on page 503. Here we see the standard DC for level 12 is 30, so that's the target number the secondary caster needs to meet or beat with a nature skill check in order to succeed. And although I don't see it spelled out in the rules, I do believe the intent is if the ritual is heightened, then you calculate these DCs using its heightened level. So if Commune with Nature was heightened to 8th level, you would look up level 16 on the table and the DC would be 35 instead. Now, it may feel counterintuitive for the secondary casters to roll first, but remember, the purpose of secondary casters is to help and support the primary caster. And based on the relative success or failure of their checks will impact the primary caster's chance for success, so these need to be rolled first. The top of page 409 shows the results for secondary checks. On a success, the secondary caster does not provide any bonuses or penalties to the primary caster's check. On a critical success, they grant the primary caster a +2 circumstance bonus on their check. On a failure, they impose a -4 circumstance penalty, and on a critical failure, not only do they impose that penalty, but the primary check's final result is lowered by 1 step. So critical successes become normal successes become failures, and failures become critical failures. And keep in mind that typed bonuses do not stack. So if you have 3 secondary casters and 2 critically succeed and 1 fails, the primary caster will suffer a -2 circumstance penalty to their check because the 2 + 2 bonuses would not add together. Once those secondary checks are rolled, costs are paid and all resources are consumed. In this case, that's 60 gold worth of incense. And finally, it's time for the primary caster to roll their nature skill check. The primary caster must have master proficiency or higher, and primary checks usually have a very hard DC for a level that's twice the ritual spell level. We know from the secondary checks that the standard DC is 30, and very hard simply means add 5. So the DC for the primary caster's nature check is 35, and their skill check is further modified according to the outcome of the secondary caster's checks. The DC for a ritual can further be modified as the GM sees fit. For example, they may choose to lower the DC if the ritual is being cast on a holy day to their god, or at an intersection of ley lines, or under the light of a full moon. The ritual's description will detail the result of the check as usual. And 2 final points to be aware of. First, the ritual gains the magical tradition that is associated with the primary check skill. In this case, Commune with Nature has the primal tradition since it is always cast using nature. In the case of something like Atone, you have a choice between nature or religion as the primary check, so it can be cast with either the primal or divine traditions. And some rituals call for the targets to make a save. If you have training in the ritual's tradition, then you use that tradition's spell DC. If you are not trained in that tradition, then you calculate the ritual's save DC as 12 plus your level plus your highest mental ability modifier, either intelligence, wisdom, or charisma. Before we close, I'd like to take a moment to thank all of our patrons. These videos would not be possible without their continued generosity and support. Members of the Basics for Gamers Patreon community receive special benefits like getting to vote on the topics that we cover in the future, and also they get to see these videos 1 week and ad-free before everybody else. Visit the link shown on the left of the screen and in the description if you'd like to know more about becoming a patron. If you would like to support this channel and help it grow, the easiest way to do that is by subscribing and clicking the bell icon so you get notified when new videos release. And we can always be reached through our Twitter and Facebook pages too. Thanks for watching, take care, and we will see you soon with more Basics of Pathfinder.